This video is geared for anyone, 8 years old all the way up to the college grad. People with, or even without, an interest in geology. This video is an attempt to answer how the sedimentary layers stacked like this, where did the material get pulled from to build these layers, and how did the animal fossils get buried so high up. But the deeper I dug, and the further my work on this video progressed, the more confusing the evidence became. If anyone tells you they understand the rock layers, they're straight up fibbing to you. There are some real mysteries here. Why has no one talked about this cool stuff before? In fact, where the evidence has taken me is so crazy, I expect few will agree with me. It's that unexpected. If you disagree, and maybe have a better solution to the curiosities I point out, that's great. Because the true goal is thought and conversation, not that you arrive at a matching destination I didn't even expect to find. I utilize Google Images to display common examples. With this method, I couldn't fake or cherry-pick my findings, as most other videos do. But this is the very thing that made me realize my original theories were incorrect. By the end of this video, this photo here will be less confusing, and at the same time, way more confusing.
A simple question. How can layers build uphill when gravity is exclusively pulling downhill?
Another successful haul. Our kingdom really knows how to move some dirt. Show off. It's easy to find videos like this one. Gravity tosses dirt downhill all the time, effortlessly. I wonder what process is going to put that dirt back on top of that hill. The dirt had to get up there somehow. Every day us ants fight nature's force, gravity. What if instead we harnessed the force of nature that built that hill and used it to our benefit? We'd be the most awesome kingdom in the land. But how does nature put dirt on top of the hill? Those guys look cool. Wonder if they'll know. Hey guys.
Hey there, brother.
Yo, nerd. What up?
We're going to win the Queen's affection with this dead grasshopper.
Oh, no doubt, she'll be impressed. But I may have an even better idea. I just need some help sorting it out.
What you got?
There are two opposing forces in nature. One that builds the hills, and one that tears hills down. Can you help me identify them?
We learned in school there are three main types. There's water erosion, wind erosion, and ice erosion.
Let's search for examples of this. A water erosion example we can all relate to. Here's another type of water erosion, and an example of wind erosion. If you look at all of these, you will find a common theme. It's going from a higher place to a lower place. It's eroding a higher location to a lower location. This higher place is being consumed by the sea. When we look, we keep finding examples of higher to lower.
Well, it's gotta stop somewhere. It can't just keep traveling downhill.
If we look at pictures of rivers, we see brown dirt dumping into the sea. Those dirt deposits came from somewhere. If erosion always travels to a lower location, I think we found the destination. Where else could this brown be coming from, other than someplace higher?
You proved your point. Let's see some examples of ice erosion.
Sure. Looking, I can validate there's rocks in this stuff. And it looks like it's transporting the rocks from a higher elevation to a lower elevation.
Let me guess. You're going to mention the rocks are going to the sea.
Exactly.
These images make me sick. I couldn't move that much dirt in a million lifetimes.
I think they're cool.
You think that just because you don't work. It's aggravating to look at.
A moment ago, I would have completely agreed with you. But the more I think about it, the more excited I get. My plan's gonna impress the Queen way beyond a dead grasshopper.
Whatever.
He's just jealous. What's your idea?
Brace yourselves! We have seen the force that tears down the dirt, tossing it into its watery grave at the bottom of the sea. But there is another force way more awesome, one that kicks erosion in its saggy gut. This force constructs, drawing dirt out of the deep and placing it on top of the very hills. My plan is to harness this natural force of awesome and build our kingdom to the sky. My pioneering friends, all I need out of you is to tell me what the name of this natural force is that brings the rocks and dirt from a lower level and places it on a higher level.
What are you talking about? Dirt doesn't go uphill. There's a thing called gravity.
Well, that doesn't make sense. That hill had to be created somehow.
Well, yeah, but it took millions of years. You really should have learned that in school.
Millions of years is a length of time. I was hoping to identify the process.
I get the curiosity to your question. I can list many processes acting on the current natural structures, tearing them down. Unfortunately, I can't recall seeing any forces that build them up.
Well, that's a bummer.
But hold on, I can make this even more perplexing. The building process has to be more common than the erosion process. Otherwise, the erosion process would win, and everything would become flat.
That is perplexing, because if the building process is more common, why can't I recall witnessing it?
But hold on, let's kick this up a notch further. Looking at this photo, one would think the hill is there in the background, but technically speaking, everywhere above sea level is a hill. For example, if you were to go in your backyard and dig down, you will run into the same sedimentary layering in your hill. Meaning, it's not just the hills that are growing over time, it's nearly every place above water on the planet. If you live in the orange area on the map, you are living on sedimentary rocks that have layered up in height over time. Nearly anywhere, when you dig into the earth, you can see the layers.
That black layer there is coal. Coal is made of plants, and the plants were once alive on the top layer. Somehow, tons of new layers of rock got on top of the dead plants.
Check out how tall these layers are stacked.
This is perplexing. The volume of soil distributed across the earth is mind-boggling. Can you think of any continuous process to justify what we're seeing?
I see what you're saying, but I have personally never witnessed something to account for it.
Come on, don't give up. Let's try to figure it out.
Maybe the hill has always been there.
Maybe. No, couldn't be. In those hills we find fossils of dead animals. This would mean at one point the animals were here and the hill was not. This would force me to conclude the hill had to come at some later time.
Maybe plate tectonics pushed the ground up, creating the hill.
Maybe. No, couldn't be. If the animal died and then the ground was pushed up, where would he be now? He would have rotted away. There would have had to have been some type of burying action to be, well, buried.
Maybe dirt sediments from water were laid down. Then plate tectonics pushed that up, creating the hill.
Maybe. No, couldn't be. In the lower rock layers we find defined animal footprints. Most animals underwater swim, they don't walk. This would indicate the layers were already above the water line when they were created. Additionally, many layers do not contain sea deposits like sand and shells.
Volcanoes lift Earth from a lower elevation to a higher one. Could this explain how the hill was created?
Rocks created from volcanoes is called igneous. Igneous rocks may be a factor, but they're only 15% of the volume in question. It is important to note we are not going to find many fossils inside igneous rocks, for obvious reasons. Volcanic ash does fit the bill, but most hills have very little of this. I think we should focus on sedimentary rock, because it is what the vast majority of the hills are made of. Also, it is where you're going to find fossils.
Maybe glaciers from a distant past built the place up.
Maybe glaciers were here in the past. Fortunately, they still exist elsewhere on the planet. We can see how they behave. It looks to me like they travel downhill, cutting through layered rock, creating valleys. It does not look like they travel uphill, building mountains.
Maybe the buildup is caused by many years of trees depositing leaves on the ground.
Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. The tree makes the leaves by pulling nutrients from the ground. When the leaves fall, they are merely returning from where they came. Falling leaves would explain how objects on the ground get covered root deep in soil, but trees do not create soil. With nothing new added, the hill could not possibly grow.
I thought plants create topsoil.
I think it's more likely they convert it. Another way to look at it. If you place soil, rocks, water, and seeds in a sealed jar, the seeds would turn into a plant. The soil and rocks would likely break down and eventually convert it into some great topsoil. If this cycle continued for eons, the quantity of soil would never increase upward. The jar would never fill up. The additional soil would have to be pulled from somewhere else.
Maybe it falls from the sky.
Maybe. Let's take a look. Although I've never seen this where I am, it appears to be happening in the desert. But even then, this process causes material to strip away from the land and deposit it into the ocean. In order for the hills to grow through this process, there should be a lot coming down from the sky. Looks like near zero.
I think your argument needs more evidence.
Agreed. The Statue of Liberty was cleaned in 1986. We can see the letters on her book would be perfect for collecting falling dirt. You can see the letters bucket water, but after 30 years, a minimal collection of solids. If the past was anything like today, the hills were not created by sky dirt.
You realize all you have to do is Google the answer.
That would be zero fun. Besides, the Queen would be like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. You Googled the answer. My hero."
I hate to stop you, but your animation here is a fail.
Why do you say that?
Old black and white photographs show it was taller in the past. This is an example of something tall eroding into something small. This is not an example of something growing.
That is puzzling. You know what? It would reason that the eroded rocks from the top were pulled down by gravity into these piles of rubble at the bottom. And the black rock at the top formed the black pile here. This hill isn't growing upward, it's eroding downward. This natural arch is made of rock, meaning it had to be underground at one point. Then erosion and gravity pulled all of the material away, leaving the arch remaining. In the past, this area was higher in elevation, and now it is lower. Look at all these other examples. They are like skeletal remains of much larger hills. But all that was chiseled away by erosion and carried away by gravity. Do you suspect this arch is growing? It looked like this in the past, and then this? Sadly, no. In 2017, gravity and erosion did as you would expect. What about this famous landmark? I can assume these sedimentary pillars did not grow out of the ocean. It's obvious the pillars and the cliff were once connected. Then erosion, water, and gravity carried the missing material into the ocean. As proof, this rock formation was lost in 2005. You have to wonder how much wider this continent was in the past. Google search coastlines. Can you locate an image that doesn't show signs of eroding into the ocean? If it has any height and it's near the ocean, it's making its way into the ocean. With all of these rock layers eroding away, how in the heck are new rock layers forming on top?
Me! Ooh, pick me!
Oh, what do you got?
First, let's talk about all the clues. We have a thing called the geologic column. A long time ago, in the past, one layer was built on top of the other layer through slow and natural means. The oldest layer being on the bottom, the newest layer being on the top, freezing the fossils in time. This is an important process. This is how we can safely say dinosaur bones are very, very old.
Where can we see this process in action?
This is known science. Let's Google search the formation process, like you did erosion.
Certainly. This should help me understand. Again, fossils are found in what type of rock? Sedimentary rock. All of these examples declare fossils are found in sedimentary rock. This one states sedimentary rock, and the graphic depicts the geologic column, with land animals starting about halfway up. You can find humans at the top of their drawing. Additionally to sedimentary rock, this one states lava rock would destroy fossils. Now let's check out photos of the formation process.
This is strange. We have sat through boring photo after boring photo of the erosion process, but in the formation process, I'm only spotting drawings. I do spot a couple photos, but they are again of erosion. Show me a photo of the formation process.
Add the keyword, photos, to the end. Formation photos. Well, anyways, again, too slow of a process for photos.
The geologic column tells us animals died and were buried in the past. In order to be buried, they would have to get covered up in dirt. Guess what process did this burying, locking each set of fossils on a higher layer than the previous layer? Here is your final opportunity to guess.
It weathers, then it erodes from a high place down into the rivers, the lake beds, and the sea, thus creating the rock layers we have today.
My question was, how do the high hills get created? It wasn't, how do the lowest places on Earth get filled with dirt?
Here, let me find an example you'll understand. It weathers, it erodes, it deposits, it compacts, and then it becomes a hill in the desert.
What? How did it go from being down in the water to becoming a hill? I feel a critical step on how the rock got out of the water was blatantly skipped.
Maybe they just failed to address that detail.
Let's check out another.
This diagram is nearly identical, down to the placement of the sun and the cactus. Goes to show, if you don't want to fail in the school system, you gotta regurgitate the information as you are told. Whoever made this deserves an A for regurgitation.
Let's find another example.
For real, this is nearly the same drawing. Except this one shows erosion going down into a valley. Logically, this teaches a valley ends up as a hill.
Come on, the diagram is meant for kids.
Hey, I'm just saying that's what it teaches. If you teach them bad science when they're young, it's possible they will never reevaluate what they were taught. Have you ever succeeded at convincing an adult of anything? You gotta wonder, why do these diagrams fail to explain what the photos actually demonstrate? Logic tells me this river cut the sedimentary hill. It didn't build it.
A deeper look at the rock layers.
Flat rock layers are everywhere. Unfortunately, most are covered up by plant life. In places of dense vegetation, it's only where rivers or humans have exposed them that we can see the layers. But they are underground, regardless if you can see them or not. Odds are they're under your feet now. From this angle, we can see how the layers span through the ground. Imagine the layers continuing out like this into the distant horizon. And from this angle, we can see how vast, even, flat, and horizontal those layers are. The lack of plants and the distinctness of the layers make the Grand Canyon perfect for comprehending what rock layers look like. Thanks to the river cutting this area, we get a sliced view of the layering. Cliffs are also helpful. Again, the question of this video is, how is another layer going to get on top of the layers you see here? And where is the extra soil going to be pulled from to build that additional layer? Here we can see where men have dug into the ground, exposing the layers. The ground in this area is sitting on horizontal layering. And logically, it extends further out than you can see. Here's another type of terrain. This can be found in the Google Street View of Google Earth. On both sides of the road, we can see the layered hills. Clearly, these layers were once connected until men cut this gap. These layers extend horizontally through this hill. From this view, we can confirm that logic, as we can see the layers continue horizontally into the hill in the background. And that hill has additional layers that stack up to an even higher altitude. How did the top layer get up there? Where did its building material get pulled from? From Google Earth, we can achieve a better comprehension of what we're looking at. Here we can see the exposed layers are at the top of the hills, and there are many hills just like them. Unfortunately, vegetation covers most of the rock layers. But we can infer the same rock layers exist within each of them. The hills have just been separated by these valleys. From above, we can get a better understanding of the valleys. To me, those lines look like erosion paths, as though the hills were the same height until erosion carved those valleys. As we fly down, you will notice most of the hills cap at a near identical height, adding to the belief this whole area was built to this height here. Then erosion carved the valleys out, meaning although the area looks different because of the valleys, the layers appear to be flat and continuous for miles, like all the other examples we looked at. So how are these perfect layered rocks sequentially forming?
Don't landslides produce layering on top of old layering?
Layers, yes. Large, perfectly horizontal layers? I've not seen that. Do these look like a match to you?
Maybe the rain comes by and flattens them out.
Do you recall seeing rainwater create flat areas? I bet you can recall rain digging trenches or potholes. This is what it looks like on the small scale. For a large-scale example, look at these massive 2,500-foot tall sedimentary mountains. You can see the horizontal layering, and from this view, you can see they share a nearly perfectly horizontal top. I would assume this entire surrounding area was once as tall as the top of these mountains are. Then erosion cut these valleys away, leaving the mountains. Lucky for us, this example does not have the vegetation on it. Here we can see the layers span through each of the hills. Does it appear to you rainwater is creating flatness or destroying it? This view is quite puzzling. In order for the rock layers to grow over time, a higher place has to provide additional building material. Can you spot the higher place where the building material is pulled from to produce these layers? The only thing I can spot is erosion. Where can I find an example of the formation process?
Well, sure it erodes there, but it is settling further downstream. Have you never watched TV?
Now, becoming a fossil is no easy thing. First, the plant or animal has to die, and then it has to get buried, usually by erosion. You know, rain falls down, washes dirt downhill, and covers things.
Okay, so maybe the buildup is simply further downhill. It appears the water takes the debris down this path. Here the walls are high and it slants down to the river. This river has carved this area out, and it must be redepositing it someplace else. Here it looks like the river is cutting the rock and depositing nothing. Let's go further down. High eroded walls, low center. All these erosion lines pointing straight to the river. It has to be depositing the debris somewhere. Are we doing this right? Let's check out this explanation from PBS. We have our river.
Check.
Mountains in the back.
Check.
Dino dies. It rains. He gets covered in mud. Wowzers, he gets buried deep. Those are rivers above him. This should be very easy to locate. Good night. According to PBS, these river sediments will create massive flat sediment layers. Are we just missing them? No perfectly flat layers found forming here. Oh wait, here we go. Just kidding. Rivers cut, they don't build. The river has to be giving up its dirt somewhere. Wait, over there. I found where it's depositing the mountains. In the sea, like I've been saying this whole time. This fails to explain how we get new sedimentary mountains in the high places. The BBC indicates the same story. Water is found exclusively in the lowest immediate location. That means surrounding every river, you will find higher ground. If water sediment is the cause of the ever-growing rock layers, how can those high areas form by a river that can never reach their tops? If water cannot reach the height of the high areas in the background, even in a severe flood, then how can water be the cause of the building process? Can rivers create flat areas, or only expose them? River sediment only gets deposited in the lowest of the lows, a place where the river would simply consume it again later. During a flood, most of the sediment goes into the ocean. The sediment that sticks around typically isn't deposited far from the river, because even during a flood, the water is trapped in the very valley it created. Even then, it does not produce vast, flat, even, horizontal layering like the rock layers. Remember what the rock layers look like. How is a low-lying river ever going to add to these rock layer stacks? But I bet it was a river that exposed them.
One river isn't evidence. I'd like to see another.
Certainly. When I look, everything matches how I would expect it to look. I see a river that is at the lowest possible location, and the existing sedimentary layered hills at the highest. I see where erosion has cut deep valleys, with a guilty-looking river at the bottom of all those erosion lines. I'm not seeing material sequentially accumulating on top of existing old layers, as this drawing demonstrates. And why did Bill Nye, PBS, and the BBC all choose to use drawings instead of photos? Where do things behave this way? When I look at rivers, they transport old hills away from the land and deposit it into the ocean. Does areas touched by rain or river water look like the rock layers? How did the last layer to form get up here? How will the next layer to form get on top of the rest?
How the building process occurs is curiously dodged.
You're only looking at images. What does that prove? I feel you'll have more success reading what they're claiming.
All right, again, let's use Google to see common examples. No cherry picking. I'm speeding this up so it's less boring. You're welcome to press pause or view the websites for yourself.
The gravel, sand, and mud settle to the bottom in the rivers, lakes, and oceans.
Again, it tells us how pits are filled, but skips over how the high areas receive additional layers over time. Let's see. Here we go.
Layers are piled one on top of the other.
For an educational webpage on rock layers, apparently they didn't feel this deserved further explanation.
Then these rocks are deposited horizontally.
She completely avoided the hard question. Okay, here we go. Drawings demonstrating over time layers forming on top of each other. Looky, they're even numbered. It's just like that drawing of the geologic column that you have.
These sediments stack up vertically.
Do your readers not care how the layers buried that monkey? I mean, maybe it's just me, but it feels like this website avoided this on purpose. Well, maybe I am the only reader who is curious how dirt got on top of that monkey.
Nope, the next one is by Christians, not scientists.
Alright, let's keep moving. Failed to load. I got nothing to show you.
Sediment can be transported by rivers, wave action, wind, gravity, or glacial ice, be deposited,
A bunch of forces take the sediments downhill.
and become buried.
So, what uphill force came behind it and buried it?
A fast-flowing river deposited heavy sediment grains along its banks.
This example is grasping at straws. What they're referring to is the same process that caused rivers to wind. It deposits dirt on the inner arch, causing the riverbank to form. Bravo, they have defined a real example of uplift. But this momentary uplift is part of a much larger cutting process that rivers do. Visual examples show riverbanks are lower than the surrounding ground. These banks cannot be created higher than the water was at the time it built them. Rivers cut, that's the only thing I have ever seen one do. Which of these two examples can you account for in your lifetime? If rivers do create uplift, where can I find an example of B? When you do a Google search for mountain rivers, do we see rivers creating mountains or rivers cutting valleys? Are these rivers filling these canyons in or slowly cutting them out? This website tells us to think about it. So, let's think about it.
The oldest pancake in a stack is always at the bottom. The rocks of the Grand Canyon are a lot like pancakes.
What they're referring to is the law of superposition. The bottom layer had to be laid first, therefore the layer on top of that has to be newer than the bottom. But you have to ask yourself, in this analogy, who is the chef?
Nope.
Moving on. Okay, so how do these pancakes stack up on each other to cover that monkey?
Pile into layers.
Again, am I the only one who feels like websites about rock layer creation should maybe explain the process?
As time passes, more and more materials get eroded and settle on older layers. Thus, layer upon layer is formed.
Basically, it's a mystery. Thus, they are skipping over it.
Sediment are deposited out of air, ice, wind, or water flows carrying the particles in suspension.
Erodes, travels downhill, and what magic causes it to get on top of the previous layer?
It builds up.
Bravo, well dodged. Oh wait, there's more.
Each new layer is laid down horizontally over the older ones in a process called superposition.
This answer appears more dishonest than simply avoiding the issue. If you recall from earlier, superposition is not a process. It's a law that simply states the lower layers are older than the top ones, like a stack of pancakes.
Example: a volcanic eruption may create a layer made of hardened ash.
This page is a discussion on sedimentary rock, but when we search for common examples of sedimentary rock, sedimentary volcanic ash is only listed on one of these websites, Wikipedia, under the category Other, grouped with and other relatively uncommon processes. Isn't it odd they were forced to pick an uncommon example? possibly because it's one of the only examples we can account for.
Newer layers are at the top.
Basically, then some magic happens. The kids at the top of the page sure look happy about not having to learn anything. Wikipedia.
And then transported to the place of deposition by water, wind, ice, mass movement, or glaciers, which are called agents of denudation.
Basically, it erodes, then travels downhill. Here we find out how the rock layers got way up in the sky.
Where the lithosphere moves upward, tectonic uplift, land eventually rises above sea level.
Okay, let's go through this and see if this is worth consideration. This is a common drawing you can find on the internet to demonstrate this process. We will rewind time and put it into motion. Animals are carried to the bottom of the ocean and buried in eroded sediments. Time passes. Tectonic uplift. And we have today.
Yep, that's it.
Well, what does this mean if this is true? We are in the past. This body of land we see here represents the land in the diagram. This starting point is not underwater, so no fossils could be buried here. Then it starts to erode, burying dead animals in the underwater sediment layers. Then, plate tectonics pushes up the first section of land. Because this is the first section of land, it would contain the first fossils. So we could say the oldest fossils would be found here. Then, over time, more layers are pushed up, each time containing newer fossils than the previous. Finally, we get to today, and the most recent fossils would be found here. Fossils dated oldest to newest, the further from the center you go. Trouble is, this directly contradicts your geologic column, which dates from low elevation to high elevation. Or in other words, instead of a geologic column with the oldest pancake at the bottom, you would end up with a geologic expanse like this, where the newest fossils are found exclusively near the ocean. And that contradicts data found on every fossil map. It contradicts Pangaea, which states the continents were already formed at the time they split up. It denies the existence of rock layers that do not contain sand or ocean life. It denies the existence of multiple coal strata buried in the rock layers. It denies the existence of many coal mines that are below sea level. It denies the existence of fossil footprints which would only form above sea level. More importantly than anything in this video, it contradicts what I've seen with my own eyes. A video. This is a pleasant change.
Gap in here. Now, how might those have formed? Well, I'll show you.
Perfect. Maybe he will explain how the layers got on top of each other.
Some wet sand. Some water.
No, he just dumped it in.
Nonetheless, we're forming a layer of mud on top of the sand. Now, event number 2. I'm going to add some more sand.
This time around, he declared he added the second layer. Is he trying to tell us he added the rock layers on top of each other?
He didn't mention how nature could have done it.
This next website didn't mention it. Moving on.
Deposited through wind, water, ice, and or gravity at different intervals of time and compacted on top of each other.
Standard dodging answer. Gravity pulled it down, and it ended up on top. But wait, they have a way to recreate this process at home.
You dump in all of your dirt. You dump in all of your sugar. You dump in your sand.
So, I hate to ask, but was it you? Were you the one that buried that monkey? This next website didn't mention it. Moving on.
New sediments were deposited over them by advancing and retreating seas.
Advancing and retreating seas? I've never seen such a thing in my lifetime. The drawing shows the Grand Canyon. Are they implying the seas advanced to nearly the highest point in America? I mean, that idea sounds like another story I know.
Nope.
Alright, let's finish this up and revisit this Bob's Pixels later. We are nearing completion of this part of the video, I promise. Moving on. Another experiment skipping over how the layers stack.
You go create your own sedimentary layers.
Oh gosh, sorry. Didn't mean to offend.
Over long periods of time, those layers build up into much thicker ones.
Dodge the complication. This next website is the same one we were just at.
When over a long time, layers and layers of sediments get deposited on top of each other.
Once again, a website dedicated to the education of rock formations, but unexplainably dodging the science behind it.
Blah, blah, blah. If you want real science, you're going to have to check out an actual science book.
Let's.
Sedimentary rocks occur in layers called strata. About 75% of all rock exposures on the continents are sedimentary rocks.
If they are the vast majority of rocks, then this section is important and should contain a lot of detail in the process. The photo shows rocks suffering from the effects of erosion high in the air. Too bad the photo is not of the creation process.
Recall the rock cycle, which shows the origin of sedimentary rocks.
Let's scope that rock cycle out real quick. You can see the existing rocks weather and deposition down into the ocean. Then, it turns into layered rocks at the bottom of the ocean. Then, without explanation, it all appears on top of the land. This section does not have what we are looking for. Let's go back to the sedimentary rock section.
Weathering begins the process. Next, gravity and erosional agents, running water, wind, waves, and glacial ice, remove the products of weathering and carry them to a new location, where they are deposited.
How gravity and erosion deposits, which are strictly downhill in nature, end up in the complete opposite location does not appear to be a discussion of an earth science education book. I'm going to summarize the rest of this for speed. The paragraph continues explaining that particles turn into rock. The next paragraph basically states it again. It erodes in a downhill fashion, collects in the lowest places. Next it states these downhill-only processes are never-ending and continuous. Oh wait, here's that dodging answer we have grown accustomed to.
As piles of sediments accumulate.
I don't know they are dodging. It's more likely they just don't know the answer.
That would be an acceptable statement, but this book doesn't provide it. If earth science education is the real goal of this 13th edition school book, shouldn't this challenge be welcome to the students? Why hide it? They explained that sedimentary rock is 75% of the rocks we see on the planet. It's a bit concerning that an earth science book fails to understand 75% of where we live, and they hide that fact. When I look at the earth, all I can locate is evidence of erosion downhill. With only downhill forces acting on the area, how do you think these rock formations got here? I would be forced to assume the area was higher in the past, probably reaching the top of the rocks. And in the future, this area will continue this downhill-only pattern. When I look at this truck, in the past I would assume it looked newer too. And in the future, I would assume it will eventually meet its end. An hourglass shares this downhill-only pattern. What happens to it without an alternative force acting upon it? It's curious this book fails to mention an observable alternative force acting upon the earth, yet refers to erosion as never-ending and continuous. Let's check out that rock cycle again. Everyone has witnessed erosion and mud settling to the bottom of the low places. According to Wikipedia, Prior to the recent addition of man-made dams, the Mississippi River has been dumping 400 million tons of the United States into the sea every year. This 400 million tons is only pulled from 1.15 million square miles of land. If you calculate that out, it is debatable to say that every square mile of land on the Earth, every year, loses 347 tons of land matter. Let's adjust the thickness of these arrows to represent how much effect these erosion processes have on the Earth. This next process possibly happened far in the past, and I would expect it caused violent earthquakes. How much sediment do you expect the mountains that are riddled with violent earthquakes are currently producing? How about volcanic eruptions? How much material are they producing where you live? After adjusting this diagram to be a more honest representation of their effect on the Earth, does it still look like a continuous cycle? To me, as much as the authors of this book do not want to accept the obvious, the Earth is headed to the same fate as this hourglass. Unless something new is brought to the table, I have to conclude the mechanisms that built the mountains happened in the past, and are not currently occurring.
Let's not give up just yet.
How was it formed?
Yep, that's the question.
The truth is that no one knows for sure.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that.
The sediments that covered the roots of these ancient mountains were deposited by a series of advancing and retreating ocean coastlines.
What does he believe caused them to advance and retreat?
Melting and freezing of the polar cap. How do we know this? Well, the fact is that most of the rock in the Grand Canyon is composed of sedimentary rock which can only be formed at the bottom of the ocean or in shallow coastal plains.
I am blown away. He actually attempted to address the mystery instead of dodging it. And I love the fact he admitted he didn't know. Let's scope this out. If you search Geology sea level change, you can find graphs showing this theory is acknowledged. If you search Grand Canyon fossils, you can see water critters lived there. Water critters, buried in vast flat layers, would have to require vast amount of water.
Are you saying it's a match?
We could simulate this with online tools.
Is this a sea level change simulator?
I know, the internet. Let's do some quick math, then crank the water level to a point where the Grand Canyon is covered in water.
Well, that's strange. I would expect maybe mountain goats could survive, but it seems like everything else would be extinct.
Too bad there wasn't something like a boat to save breeding pairs for future generations. The Earth Science book breaks geology into two eras. The first era is the 16th and 17th hundreds. Here, James Ussher's catastrophism was the predominant theory.
Catastrophists believed that the Earth's landscapes had been developed primarily by great catastrophes.
The second era began in the late 1700s. That's when James Hutton stepped in with uniformitarianism.
This means that the forces and processes that we observe presently shaping our planet have been at work for a very long time.
Why is this theory accepted by the book authors?
Hutton persuasively argued that weak, slow-acting processes could, over long spans of time, produce effects just as great as those resulting from sudden catastrophic events. Unlike his predecessors, Hutton carefully cited verifiable observations to support his ideas.
Keep in mind, Hutton's fame comes from his explanation on how the rock layers were built. That's why they're talking about him. What were these verifiable observations that built the rocks up, like in the drawing?
For example, when he argued that the mountains are sculpted and ultimately destroyed by weathering and the work of running water, and that their wastes are carried to the oceans by processes that can be observed, Hutton said, "We have a chain of facts which clearly demonstrates that the material of the wasted mountains have traveled through the rivers."
In other words, erosion destroys, and water carries that downhill to the ocean.
What more can we require?
An uphill example?
Nothing but time.
Were the rock layers created by long periods of time? Or were they created by something more sudden and catastrophic? Let's not cherry pick photos. Let's look at common examples for clues.
Photographical clues and curiosities.
We will start with fossilized animal tracks. Take a good look at the rock layer these tracks are planted in. Notice the preserved detail. Can we find a match to common natural ones? Forest floors are full of debris consisting of bugs, plants, sticks, and roots. In these photos, do you see large quantities of debris, or even imprints of debris? If footsteps left imprints, wouldn't you expect sticks and roots would have also? The forest floor does not look like a match. Quality footprints clearly would not form in grasslands. Could the footprints have formed in the desert? Dry sand tracks have no definition. Also notice the large, not very flat sand dunes. Does dry sand appear to be a visual match to you? And on the beach, footprints would get washed away or blown away. Prints under the ocean would simply not work or last. Stepping on rock does not leave tracks. In a brief moment, we have ruled out the majority of the earth. If we look at mud, we can see definition left behind in the footprints. Is mud a visual match to you? But what should happen next? The mud dries and cracks. But in this story, there was an even, wide, flat, muddy surface. Animals came by and left their tracks. And then another even, wide, flat layer appeared on top, not disturbing the first. Oddly enough, they did not bond to each other. Next, notice there is no foliage in any of these photos. Obviously, this layer was horizontal at one point, and now it has tipped on its side. This is just a fragment of a much larger layer. This tells me animals were running around on top of the barren layers, and there is no vegetation to be found. Could have these animals been fighting for survival as these layers of earth were being created? The next time you're looking at rock layers, notice you are unlikely to spot roots. We can all agree, most animals do not live underground. In order for an animal to fossilize, he would first have to be buried in dirt. This is a rare story. Typically, he would be eaten first. On the other hand, plant roots are commonly found underground. If you've ever dug in your backyard, you know this. I would expect roots to be the most common fossil in existence. If this is a slow, natural process, the root fossils should stack with every new layer. If an animal corpse can last long enough to produce a fossil, wouldn't you expect roots would also? Logically speaking, a slow, natural geologic column should be a twisted mess of fossilized tree roots.
Hold up, are you trying to say there are no fossilized roots? That doesn't sound right.
I know roots exist, but like any other fossil, they are rare and typically busted up. But we can find recently fossilized roots spanning the top layer, and they look like you'd expect. The common root fossil in the lower layers are not found vertically spanning those layers. Do you think the process that buried these plants in this heap was slow and natural? This top layer example here looks like how all layers should look. Absolutely filled with roots. Roots that match how trees actually live. But only if the layers formed slow and naturally. You know what the common natural tree looks like. The past ones should have left similar looking fossils. We have all seen trees wreaking havoc on rocks today. Why don't we find them wreaking havoc in the past, while the layers were forming on top of each other? This example is the underside of tracks. Footprints like these would only form in the wet ground. Wet ground should mean root-bearing plants. Where are the roots and standard ground debris in these layers? Their food chain would require there to be plants. Pay attention to the thickness of the layer of rock that formed on top of the footprints. After the dinosaurs walked here, the ground didn't even have time to dry and crack before those next massive layers arrived on top. Do you suspect it was a bright sunny day when these tracks formed? I suspect they were running from whatever caused these new layers to form. Does this look like a slow and natural process? These are very common educational drawings for the masses. I am sure drawings of dinosaurs getting buried in the swamp looks familiar to you. In a swamp, where would have the next top layer of dirt come from to bury the dinosaurs? Look at all the vegetation and roots and uneven ground. Where's the vegetation, roots, and uneven ground? I challenge you to find something that matches those artist renditions. If you did not know, the lack of ground debris is true for most fossils. The petrified soil has such a pure consistency that fur sticks out like a sore thumb. What were they eating? If the animals did not fully rot away, why did the food? Where are the little rocks, sticks, and leaves? Also notice dead animals that did not live together, yet are found dead together. This does not look natural to me. Where could an animal crawl and die, yet not have a single stick or blade of grass with him? Maybe in the water? You know, rocks and sticks and roots are everywhere. Avoiding plant life didn't work out too well for this guy. You probably recognize this fossil. But how did the rock layers come by and bury that monkey? And without any rocks, roots, or sticks? It appears National Geographic saw sticks and leaves that I must have missed. Where could a monkey have died in a rainforest and not have a single stick imprint along with him? In case you were thinking the vegetation simply rotted away, then why is it that plant fossils can also be found with the same oddly pure soil? Once separated from the plant, you would expect the leaves to wilt rapidly. In the common natural world, where could a broken fern branch land and be surrounded by zero other standard debris? Coal is made of plants. Strangely, when these fossil plants are found together, they are commonly found in mass abundance together. Notice the layer of rock that the coal layer sits on is incredibly flat and contains no evidence of plants. We do not see roots penetrating into this old forest floor. Next is the plant layer known as coal. You don't find much soil or sand or rocks in this. It's near pure plant matter. In the world I'm familiar with, you find plant matter, sticks, rocks, and sand mixed in all of the layers. Look at the depth and width of this coal layer. The thickness here is after decomposing and compressing. If matter cannot be created or destroyed, that also means trees cannot create new matter. How could a layer of plants get this thick naturally? To me, it appears this plant material was redeposited in this massive pile. You can find dinosaur footprints on the ceilings of some coal mines. This means dinosaurs were walking on top of this pile of plants, leaving imprints. Could they have been fighting to find higher ground? Because the next thing that happens in this story is a massive layer covers everything. Looking for a natural explanation, you will find different examples, usually involving swamps. Some give vague descriptions on how the plants got buried by flat rock deposits. Most completely avoid the subject. None explain the purity found in the layering. In nature, you commonly find multiple coal layers separated by flat, rootless stone. Do the actual photos look like the natural explanation? Does this look natural at all? Looking at the coalified plants of the past, they are found on very flat ground. Yet looking at the living plants in this same photo, there is no flat ground to be found. The plants did not live between flat rock layers. It looks as if these layers were deposited in this configuration. Notice the common trees we find in the rock layers. Typically, fossilized trees have lost their roots and limbs. Why is this true even though the rest of the tree is in such good shape? This screams something catastrophic ripped them off. Many fossilized trees are found spanning vertically through the rock layers. This particular one passes through two separate coal layers. These trees were buried with so much volume that the layered rock extends above the height of the tree. Buried so rapidly that the tree did not have time to decay. Buried so rapidly that the tree remained upright through the process, even though it has no roots to hold it in that position. Buried so rapidly that other plants did not have time to grow roots in the surrounding layers. What looks slow and natural about this process? Even though these trees are vertical, without roots, logic tells me these trees did not grow in this location. They were deposited there. Here is a map of good places to find fossils. Notice the majority are all far inland. Also, fossils tend to uniquely group together. The type of fossils you find in one city are commonly not found 25 miles over. Fossil hunting underwater is too difficult, so nearly every fossil you have ever seen was found on the land, including sea fossils. Kentucky is found here, about as far away from the sea as you can get. Yet sea life are the exact type of fossils found in the northern Kentucky hills, almost exclusively coral and shellfish found in high places. When you look at rocks in this area, you will find many layers with no fossils, and some layers are nothing but fossils. Thin, even, flat layers packed dense with sea life. These critters were not living like this. Clearly, they were later busted up and smashed together. When you want to find sea life, you don't look in the high areas, you look in the low areas, where water collects, and you will find them at the bottom of that. Notice, where coral lives is anything but flat. Do these flat, horizontal, layered Kentucky hills resemble the habitat of current-day sea life? Why is it we repeatedly find in the past flat layers, but the current-day world does not live like that? Do you suspect sea life thrived in the Kentucky high hills in a dense, busted, jumbled mess in near-perfect layers? I suspect they were deposited that way. This shark was found in a Kentucky coal mine. Again, coal is made of massive heaps of dead plants. Was a shark swimming through the forest in Kentucky? Or was he deposited there? Whales sunbathing this far inland. Is it a coincidence 3 died next to each other? Or were they deposited there?
No, the area was under the ocean. Then plate tectonics lifted it up.
Are you saying the land was once under the water? I thought you believed in the pre-existing continents of Pangaea. Notice where Kentucky is. On this map, it's even further from the sea. The drawings claim the flat layers form slowly, burying fossils. In order for the layers to build, sediment has to come from somewhere else. The natural explanation has the source of that sediment coming from a larger hill. Let's check out the Kentucky Hill example. Here the flat sediment layering has been exposed for our convenience. The natural example had the dirt coming from a higher mountain. Let's locate that mountain somewhere miles out in the horizon. This entire area has a massive amount of flat layering buildup. Spotting the source of the sediment should be easy. Seeing how the current green living terrain is so uneven, how is the next layer in the geologic column going to be created as flat as the historical layers of rock? Did you spot the mountain providing the sediment that will create the next layers in the geologic column? Or did you spot the same thing I did? The high, flat layers of the past are being destroyed by erosion, carried downhill into the low river to be deposited into the ocean. But yet, from cradle to grave, we've been shown artwork depicting the layers keep building on top of each other. But every real example I can see with my eyes, there is no stacking. There's only erosion of existing layers. Which layer of paint weathers off first? Most fossils are located because erosion exposed them. Every time you spot sedimentary layers, the past demonstrates flat, even, horizontal layering, and the green, living, current-day parts look very different. In the past, it built up, and current day, it's eroding away. Let's try to find some example photos. Where can I find sedimentary rocks forming today? Examples of sedimentary rocks forming today. Sediments depositing. I find photos here, but they fail to match the geologic column. The drawings claim the flat layers form slowly, bearing fossils on top of older fossils, but I cannot find examples of this. Do you suspect that is exactly why they don't explain how the monkey got from this to this?
Maybe the fossilization process holds some clues. What is the slow, natural explanation for fossil creation?
The explanation depicts a crocodile turning into a fossil under the riverbed. River debris is found in river dirt. Notice this obvious fake example. The artist thought river debris should be included in the soil. Yet, you do not find river debris with legitimate crocodile fossil examples. What riverbed looks like these examples? Also notice, the bottom of rivers look nothing like rock layers. This river is either depositing horizontal layers at the bottom or cutting into the earth. It can't be doing both. Seeing how the walls are high and the river is low, it's definitely cutting.
Rivers build flat riverbanks. It seems like you're going out of your way to ignore that huge flat thing over there covered in houses.
Okay, let's talk about riverbanks. As we already discussed, the hills have fossils. And if you look at riverbanks, you can see they are made of eroded pieces from the rocky hills. This deposit is filled with the contaminated fossils from the old layers. Heavy fossil contamination would make a geologic column useless. Logically, riverbanks cannot be higher than the rivers that built them, so their heights cap out where the floodwaters peak. Which is why it's dangerous to build on a riverbank. A riverbank cannot continue to grow upward.
Maybe it grows upward with the deposits from multiple floods.
Let me ask you this. How old do you think this river is? If the riverbanks are layering up, why, after all these years, are they still barely above the waterline? The example geologic column requires continual upward growth. Riverbanks are lower than the surrounding area. With riverbanks, it would be more like a geologic downward stairstep. Isn't it crazy the moment fossils are not part of the subject matter, the drawings begin accurately depicting nature behaving like nature? Funny how that works. Back to my point. The sediment in the riverbanks do not match the fossils in the hills, as riverbanks are not deposited horizontally. Here is an old riverbank that has been cut into. It's not horizontal layering. A geologic column requires horizontal layering. Also, as this photo shows, riverbanks are temporary. The river is migrating toward this bank, consuming it. This mostly occurs during flooding. The fast-paced water redeposits the riverbanks elsewhere. In order for fossil layers to represent millions of years, they would have to last. Notice the strange swirly patterns in the field. Those swirls are scars left in the earth as the Mississippi River migrated through this area. Rivers cut sideways through the earth, tearing previous riverbanks down and building new ones. It doesn't matter if they cut down a high place or a low place. The replacements they build cannot be higher than the river that built them. When flooding occurs, the water causes mass erosion and rivers migrate. As we zoom out, you will see a purple line. The purple line represents where the river was when the state boundaries were defined. But you can see in many places, the river is no longer in that documented location. When we zoom out further, you'll start to notice a giant scar on the earth where the Mississippi has migrated over its long history of cutting. You can see this massive scar from space. I built this overlay to demonstrate where the scar is in respect to the state lines. This is a fossil map. They have cataloged fossil finds in respect to their location on the Earth. The colored bubbles on the map represent those finds. When you combine the Mississippi scar overlay to the fossil map, you will notice rivers are terrible at creating fossils. But rivers are good at exposing fossils that were already under the ground. To you, does it look like these layers were created by rivers? Or does it look like a river may have exposed the layering? This one's great. Fish dies and is buried in the ocean. And how does the fish go from the depths of the ocean to the top of the hills? Let's read line number 4. Turns into fossil, takes millions of years, and the fossil will appear on the surface of the soil. That explanation deserves a gold star for dodging. Here, the animal dies on the beach, and the ocean rises, covering the dinosaur and its footprints. I kid you not, the dinosaur and its footprints form into fossils under the ocean. Look at the waves smashing on the shoreline. Are the footprints of your youth fossilizing on some beach? Would a dead animal stay intact as it is slowly buried under the crashing waves? When you visited the beach, do you recall it behaving in the manner that matches the natural example? Beaches are the spot where the land meets the ocean. Does it appear the ocean is growing the land up? Or is this the spot where the ocean is consuming the land? Under the water, you will see a large plateau of sediment. I suspect this formation consists of eroded sediment that was once on top of the land. When you look with your own eyes, what do you see? Sand coming out of the ocean and traveling on top of the land? Or is the soil coming off the land and going into the ocean? Could it be the outer layers of land is eroding into the ocean? Therefore, erosion is exposing the fossils of today.
Hold the phone. Barrier islands grow over time, and I have seen that with my own eyes. Of course the beaches grow.
Correct. Beaches on the small scale do build, but this type of building is temporary. They are deposited, they move, and they are destroyed. The geologic column would require a more permanent buildup. When we look at beach erosion, we get a convenient cutaway. Do you see distinct layering in common sand of today? Yet the common animal fossils of the past are typically found laying flat on their side, at the exact spot in the rock's layering where the top layer has a clean, breaking separation from the bottom layer. A pile of beach sand does not produce this clean breaking spot. This chart does not match up to beach activity. If the top layer was produced by the beach and is at sea level, how did the lower layers get under there?
Maybe the layers are forming under the ocean, in that sand plateau down there, and the future plate tectonics will push it up out of the water, giving us layered rock with fossils.
Sure, let's entertain this natural explanation one last time and compare if it is the source of the flat fossil layering. Once again, I must note, this natural explanation flushes the other natural theory of Pangea down the toilet. This natural explanation puts the deposited layers starting under the ocean. This fails to explain why many fossil layers do not include sand or sea life. Clearly these tracks were formed on land. How did they end up buried under ocean sediment that later fossilized? If the layers were deposited under the ocean, why are there so many layers that are not full of sand? If you have been to the beach, you know the ground slopes down away from the land. The common rock strata that I am familiar with is flat and even for miles in all directions. Notice the large variety of rock types. Does this look anything like the bottom of the ocean? What about the sediment deposited under the ocean? Where can we find flat, even sediments not containing sand? Strangely, it looks exactly how we expect it to. Nothing like the rock layers. Look at all of these hungry critters. I would expect any dead land animal that made it down here would likely get destroyed by sea life. Huh! The sea must have not been hungry in the past. Look at all of the intact wings. I even spot mosquitoes. Do you suspect a mosquito would stay intact as it traveled to the bottom of the ocean? According to this natural theory of ocean sediment creating the rock layers, we have animals and deposits going underwater, creating the layers under the ocean. Then the waterline moves, exposing the sediment layers above the waterline. Those fossil layers I will mark in dark purple. The fossils formed where the sediment was at the time they were buried, and now they are no longer under the water. But now there's another batch of fossils and sediment brewing under the ocean. Because the location where the water meets the land has moved, the deposits will be in a different place on the ocean floor. I've marked this next batch of ocean sediment layers in gray. That layer too will come out of the ocean, exposing its fossils. And of course, the next era in time, once again, can only deposit where the land meets the ocean, marked in blue. Here we have a map of the U.S., color-coded according to elevation. You can see these three western states, marked in dark purple, are high in elevation. Once this high purple area is out of the ocean, new ocean sediment cannot form there. Therefore, the oldest fossils would exclusively be found in the high central areas. This is a fossil map, showing where fossils have been found across the U.S. We've selected the Cambrian period. The colored bubbles represent fossils claimed to be 540 million years old. These fossils are in layers up high, as expected. But as we go through the different fossil eras, to the most recent, notice they all appear in the highest of highs. If sediment forms in the low areas, how did new fossils form in these high areas? But there's another issue. The blue states to the east are in the low zones. This low eastern zone, marked in blue, would have been the last to come out of the ocean, and would have been too far away from land to have any early fossils. Yet on the fossil map, once again, notice every era of fossil appears across the U.S., and they appear at every elevation.
Oh, that must be why we now understand the ocean rose and fell in the past.
In this natural explanation, notice the low spot in the center. Jurassic, Triassic, and Permian all show the ocean level at the low current levels of today. Yet when we view those three low sea level eras on the fossil map, we find their fossils buried in sediment in the high areas. Unfortunately, sea level fluctuation doesn't help the natural explanation's case. Let's also compare this idea to photographical evidence. The green areas are where we live today. It's not flat. The top layer is exposed to the elements, so it suffers from erosion. You will find common examples where nature is cutting through the sediment layers of the past, exposing areas that were once large and flat, leaving visual scars. These visual scars of today include plants penetrating down into the ground. Let's take a moment and apply this erosion scarring to logic. Let's say some type of magic happened, and the layers built evenly on top of each other. And due to rain, rivers, and other general weathering, we had erosion. Also, life-giving plants had their effect, creating a top layer with a rough terrain, like today. Everything leaving a historical visual record in the layered rock. More time passes, and more unexplained even flat layers appear. Lakes take their toll and leave their mark. Plants take their toll and leave their mark. More time passes. More erosion. The natural process has millions of years to play with here. Then more of those unexplainable, vastly large, even, flat, horizontal layers appear on top. When we look through the layers, we should see historical scars from periods in time where there was living, periods in time that resemble today's terrain. Notice what exposure to the elements has done to the terrain of today. But when you look at the lower layers, do you spot any time in history with a similar, uneven terrain? Locate a historical layer that shows signs of erosion. Because fossils can be found in these layers, it means the animals existed when the layers were deposited. Can you spot the erosion marks in the historical layers? I spot current-day plants in the lower left. Can you spot the petrified roots of the past? Did no plants live during the formation of any of these layers? The natural explanation shows plants and eroded soil, hills, valleys, lakes, and rivers. But where is this eroded layer visible in the rock layers? There is an uncommon type of layer called a disconformity. When we look at the drawings, we see examples that match what we're looking for. Layers under the ground with drastic edges, and they look natural. Yet the photographical examples of these real disconformity lines have a flat or smooth surface. They look nothing like the eroded surface of today. They also lack that natural look of the erosion around them. Isn't it odd the artwork and the real-world examples are not a match? Why do you suppose that would be? You can tell this entire area should be as high and flat as the cliffs in the horizon. See the green erosion marks of today? Do you see anything imprinting through the historical layers of the past that matches the eroded, uneven terrain of today? Coal is plant matter. This means these lower layers were exposed as the top layer for a period of time. If they were exposed, why no erosion marks matching the rest of the view? Hundreds of thin layers. No erosion damage between any of them. These dino tracks were exposed as the top layer in the past, when the animals stepped here. I would expect rain, wind, and plants to destroy these imprints. Instead, another layer was laid on top, without bonding to or destroying the imprints. A dinosaur was walking through Virginia, and later, 200 feet of flat, lifeless layers followed. Looking from above, do you see all of those trees? If a dinosaur walked through this area today, and a layer of mud covered his tracks, preserving them, shouldn't there be millions and millions of buried tree parts also? Does it not seem odd that this entire area grew 200 feet, and the things we find are the least likely thing to survive? Mud footprints that were covered by mud. After mud lands on mud, it shouldn't even separate. It should just be thick mud. This lump is a dinosaur footprint. The layers are flat, consecutive, and independent. each one with no signs of life. Yet an animal was walking here between two depositing layers. Does this look slow and natural to you? Notice how independent the layers are of each other. It's not just one thick layer with varying color. What behaves like this today? Also notice how deep the footprint is through the layers. It would take an enormous amount of energy to walk through mud like this. Do you suspect this animal wanted to walk through this muck? It's not easy for us to walk through it. The mud suctions to your legs. Notice all the photos of stuck elephants on this page. I suspect an animal of the past would not wander out into a mud plain unless it had no other choice. And animals are not the only ones walking around on this plantless, flat, muddy terrain. Don't humans tend to avoid slopping through the mud? Maybe it was because, for these individuals, there was no other alternative. Maybe they were fighting to survive the mechanism that was repetitively layering the ground. This is a recent discovery of people standing in the mud in the past. You can see the toe imprints. From this view, you can see the thin layers laid one on top of the other, each independent. You can see the texture it had when it was buried. No plants between them. The layers continued to come, one after the other, until the ground got to the height of the flat layers seen in the background. And these fossils were found the same way most fossils are found. Erosion exposed them. In the past, flat layers were laid down burying animals, one after another. We can see nothing natural in our current day that matches up to what happened in the past.
I'm sorry. Just because the author of this video hasn't shown us a solution doesn't mean there isn't a solution.
That is a very true statement, and I have found something that I've been holding out on.
An unexpected match.
We have been focusing on older fossils and their layers, but there are in fact newer fossil layers. This recent fossil you see here died and was buried from falling volcanic ash. It looks strikingly similar to older fossil examples that remained fully intact. Just like older fossil layers, there's no ground debris in ash layers. This is because the volcanic ash plume didn't come from the ground surface. It came from the inside of a volcano. Then it created that familiar flat, thin layer. This is because the ash fell evenly from the sky. As the ash came down, it killed and buried these animals rapidly. Notice we see the same key details in this recent fossil layer formation as ones found deep within the geologic layering. These examples here are normal fossils. Notice how visually similar they look to the ashfall examples. These footprints were left in volcanic ash. Notice the lack of roots and lack of erosion. That's because these layers came sequentially and rapidly. That wall you see in the back is the layers that came next and preserved the details on the ground. Why were people walking around in this stuff? Because there wasn't anywhere else to walk. They were out possibly checking on loved ones and trying to escape. Then the rest of those layers dumped down. I suspect these people were probably fighting for survival. These older stone dinosaur footprint examples are not made of ashfall, but yet visually are a match. That wall in the background is the layers that came next and protected the footprints from the elements. Do you suspect this dinosaur was fighting for survival? Pompeii is another recent example that we're all familiar with. Ash fell from above, burying the victims rapidly, preserving their shape and details. Curiously, old fossils in stone can be found with the same traits. These ash layers fell rapidly from the sky. Notice how similar they look to the other layers we've looked at. If this handy arrow wasn't here, pointing out the ash layer, could you even tell which layer it was? The layers that we know fell from the sky are indistinguishable from the layers we believe that didn't. This geologic layering example is a visual match to the ashfall layers that fell from the sky.
You mean the rock layers are made out of volcanic ash?
Believe me, I wish I was saying that, but none of these materials have any business raining down from the sky, and at the same time, it looks precisely that way.
This diagram has sand layers, and sand gets airborne. That doesn't sound so crazy.
Look again at the layers in the diagram. Be honest with yourself. Is sand a visual match? Is it stacking into independent horizontal layers? Do you see any sand forming on top of that rock structure in the background? That's because sand isn't building new layers on top of old. Are footprints going to form or preserve in this stuff? Let's go through some more examples. What do your eyes tell you? Snow falling from the sky to the ground also produces the same outcome as the geologic layers went through, creating these large, even, flat, horizontal layers with no ground debris. Falling snow also buries animals as the layers stack up. Falling snow also can capture and preserve footprints. Notice how similar fallen snow looks in every regard to the other geologic layers we've looked at. Falling from the sky and landing on the ground is a process that is natural for ash and snow. Falling ash and snow are visually a match to the stone layers, almost as if this material fell from the sky and stacked these layers up. Vastly large, even, flat, horizontal, and yet gently preserve the footprints. How else did this abundance of material travel here and gently preserve the footprints?
Are you honestly saying that soil fell from the sky in mass abundance?
Hey, I'm with you. Originally, I also was expecting to find a semi-natural cause. Wikipedia provides photos of what the rock layers look like, along with multiple natural alternative answers. River silt, beach sand, coal swamp, sand dune, and lava beds. Let's quickly glance at each alternative. River silt. It's not flat. It's not vast. Deposits exclusively in the low river valleys, the very place the river will carve it out again later. Beach sand. Doesn't layer. Coal swamps mainly consist of artwork and computer renderings. Why do you suspect there's not much for photos on this subject? Probably because the bottom of swamps isn't coal and does not look like the rock layers. Sand dunes. Doesn't look anything like rock layers. Lava beds is the only partial match listed, but the majority of rock layers are not made out of this stuff. Their own natural explanations do not match their own example photos. After looking at the natural versions of the story, examples that fell from the sky, like the one before you, are the only ones that match up. Look at the ultra-thin defined layers in this photo. For your convenience, focus on the bright pink thin layer directly behind the lady. Can you imagine another natural process that could relocate this pink material here from someplace else and spread it this perfectly thin and even? It did not mix into the layer above it or below it. The layer remained perfectly thin and distinct, like all the other layers in this photo. Here we see a variety of rock types. The layers look different because they are made of different stuff, but their deposit pattern appears the same. This would be because each layer was deposited here by an identical method, yet the material varied. The idea of this material raining down from the sky to build these layers sounds ridiculous. But look at them. What other natural process could spread material as perfectly even and distinct as these layers? Layers that continue into the distance for hundreds of miles. From an aerial view, we can get a better understanding. The land is made out of those layers you see there. They are a mile thick, and they extend further in the distance than you can see.
If you're correct, and it was distributed evenly by falling to the earth, there may still be a natural explanation for that.
Before you spend too much time guessing, let's crank up the difficulty once again. As you recall, coal is made out of once living plants. These plant deposit layers look no different than the rest of the layers. All sedimentary rock layers share the same quirky, unnatural properties, even organic ones. Was plant material also raining down from above to produce near perfectly even layers? What about rock layers made exclusively out of fossils? They also share that same deposit pattern. The perfectly even, flat layers you see here continue out for miles. Snow and ash are known to fall from the sky and deposit in this configuration today. Does this look familiar? This process can generate consistent thin layers that can extend in every direction for miles. This process can generate hard, thick, heavy layers evenly on something as fragile as snow. Back to the historical layers. Once more, focus on that visually distinct layer. If a layer that thin fell on the ground today, without a top layer to protect it, how long would it remain that perfect? Imagine what rain, wind, animals, and plants would do to it. And all the varieties of rock remained perfectly distinct and undamaged for years, while waiting for the next perfect layer to form? The only answer I can see is all those layers were laid down sequentially and with minimal time between each layer. The idea of this material raining down from the sky to build these layers sounds ridiculous. But look at them. How much more ridiculous is it to think they were laid down slowly over hundreds of millions of years, and each layer remained perfectly flat, distinct, and unweathered. No rivers formed, no trees rooted. And we see distinct varieties of rock. Look at them. A single uphill source should produce a single type of rock, if it occurred naturally. Remember, the coal plant layer delivered no root damage in the layer below it. Without taking root here, these plants could have not lived here. What other process could have relocated these plants to this location, flat and even like this? A pattern that visually matches the rest of the layers. Regardless of the building material, layers formed on top of each other in the same configuration. A configuration that does not match the ground of today. As you look up through the layers, notice how flat each layer is, all the way to the top. Some of the layers in this photo are made of ash, known to disperse from above and deposit flat on the ground. Some layers are not ash, and had no business being in the sky. By looking, guess which layers are which. If you would like a clue, look at the bottom, where the grass is. Here we see an example of dirt behaving naturally. What about rock layers made exclusively out of fossils? If soil, plant parts, and critters were ripped out of the ground in one location, relocated, and dropped from above, the creation of these hills would represent something terrifying, a complete destruction and recreation of the earth. This short read is the entire story of the flood from the Bible. Being this short, clearly not every detail of this event has been provided to us, but you will find it abundantly clear the rising floodwaters killed the people and the critters. God also explained when He destroyed the animals, He will also destroy the earth. Maybe the unnatural destruction of the earth and its recreation happened unnaturally. Maybe the reason for 40 days of rain is because animals like this one fought to the bitter end to stay alive.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Listen, I don't think you understand. I don't want to believe in your Bible or your God.
Isn't that the crux of it all? Everyone is looking for the answers that validate what they already chose to believe. No one is honestly looking for the truth. Maybe that's why in 740 pages, and after 13 editions, The authors of this book chose to avoid a detailed explanation of how 70% of what we see formed. They fail to mention the anomalies that disagree with their logic, and yet call it an earth science book. I suspect the authors of this book have a bias towards naturalism, because they too do not want my God. But if you're going to exclude unnatural answers because you don't like them, then this book isn't science, it's naturalism. Don't allow them to get away with calling it science. For your consideration, this fossil before you is the extent of evidence found for Lucy. Notice how little is present. And from these incomplete fragments, the naturalists concluded, this is what a male and a female look like. And look, a child version. I have a suspicion that naturalists wanted to find a monkey man. And lo and behold, that's what they all agree they found. This is not an example of science. There's not enough evidence to conclude what you see before you. But there is evidence here. Evidence naturalists pretend to know more than they do. Evidence naturalists are blatantly manipulating us. Evidence we should not assume naturalists have been honest with us in other areas of science. Please quit calling them scientists. An honest scientist, if one existed, would never have a part in this, as there's not enough information to come to this manipulative conclusion. Think I've gone too far? Which one of these examples did the Lucy skeleton look like when it lived? To me, it looks like the only prerequisite is the exhibit should include a human ape thing. Remember, this is all the evidence they had. Their eyes don't see any more than yours do. Still not convinced of manipulation? Notice the 5 small skull fragments. Does this clearly false claim, where extra pieces have been added, make you feel manipulated? And yes, the article claims this to be the Lucy skull. In any other field of science, you would be banished from the profession for falsifying information like this. If a mechanical engineer modified results like this, he would no longer have a job because he could not be trusted, and all of his previous work and claims would need to be reviewed at this point. But curiously, manipulation causes no uproar in the sciences where naturalism and the Bible conflict. Naturalists, who do not want God, concluded this drawing of the geologic column because this is what they wanted to find. This is not the solution of science. Evidence has been excluded. Causes have been excluded. A desired outcome was in mind before they even started. And, as typical, the theory is displayed in art, not photos. Science is not at odds with the Bible. True science doesn't care about the Bible, natural or supernatural. Science is the search for answers. It's only the naturalists and the Christians that are at odds. Everyone will evaluate the photo in the background exclusively by what they already chose to believe, and then claim the other side is an idiot. I have yet to meet a single person who does not share this trait. Why do you believe people claiming to be scientists are any different? A naturalist exclusively wants a natural answer. Or in other words, AABG. Any answer but God. When the people who are in charge are looking for AABG, don't get discouraged when they find it. When I started this video, I was scared I would find evidence that would disprove God. It's scary when your belief system is threatened. I admit I was scared there was a lion waiting in the box. I mean, a lot of professionals who say they know what they're talking about say there's a lion in there. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to release it. I didn't want to let it out, and I was afraid I couldn't get it back in. But the further I cracked the box open, the more obvious it was there was no lion in there. What I found instead is evidence geologists already know there are major problems with their claimed evidences. You can see it in every documentary, diagram, and website. They mostly dodge the issues, and they rarely show their evidences. If these people were scientists, there would be no need to dodge anything. Then why are these naturalists dodging the major issues with their theories. Because they too are scared of the lion in the box, called the Bible. They too don't want their belief system shook up, so they ignore the issues that don't line up with their pre-chosen belief system, and only focus on the evidences that appear to coincide. Quit allowing naturalists to call themselves scientists. Excluding evidence is not science. The next time you read an article where scientists determined blase blase, remember, when they say scientists, they actually mean naturalists. And when they refer to science, they actually mean naturalism. Then when you read the paper, you can be like, naturalists found the AABG conclusions they set out to find. That's rather expected. The next time you take a flight, look out the window and ask yourself, from up here I can see everything. If there was a continuous building process generating a geologic column as the naturalists say there is, how is the next layer of dirt going to get on top of what I see here already? Where would it even come from? I can see rivers transporting dirt to the ocean. They are brown because they have dirt in them. But where is the building process? What else has been taught to me that I shouldn't believe? Sadly, it's evident we've failed the Queen.
How did our heroes get fossilized up on this mountain? Some of the most brilliant minds are hard at work pondering this very issue. Did they get covered by sediment from that river down below the cliffs? Maybe they ventured down into the low valley, and it became a hill in the desert. Maybe they walked through that computer-rendered coal swamp. Maybe they laid down on a beach, and they were slowly covered along with their footprints. One thing is for sure, it was a natural process. Soon a natural answer will be located. Stay tuned to your local TV station for more one-sided updates.
Questions and answers.
You lied. Not all rock deposits are perfectly flat and horizontal.
Are rock layers that lack uniformity suddenly explainable? Are they being created today? Or are they also exclusively eroding away?
You lied. I found natural examples of things you said don't exist.
The Earth is huge. You will be able to find rare examples of just about anything. But if your goal is truth, you should inquire common examples to explain the common world around us. Still convinced you found the answer? Please provide me the latitude and longitude of where I can see your example in action. I would love to have the opportunity to compare your example to the actual large-scale rock layers. Maybe you solved it.
If the ground isn't increasing, why are archaeologists always digging?
There are natural reasons the past can be buried. But the majority of things they dig up, corpses, which people bury, foundations, which people bury, and trash pits, which people bury.
It would take millions of years for all that erosion. You Christians still don't have a leg to stand on.
Sure, at slow speeds, water barely erodes. But the higher the volume of water, the faster it moves. And fast-moving water is what produces the majority of erosion. One nasty flood can produce more erosion than that of 100 years of the day-to-day. In the Bible, the unnatural flood is described as exceeding the height of the mountains, and it required 150 days to recede. I would assume there was a massive amount of water producing a massive amount of erosion. If you tried to bend these stone layers today, they would crack. This would prove these layers were soft at one time. While these layers were still soft, they were likely more susceptible to erosion. Erosion is a big concern for a lot of people. Here's a hint. These charts are not here because these places are gaining soil over time. Someone looking for an exclusively natural answer will find erosion a much more challenging problem.